It's so hard to turn off the Big Brother live feeds when it's nomination day because of all the meetings happening, but we're gonna do it. I'm gonna mute it so I can film this video, but I'll get back to that in a second. Anyone else watch Big Brother US? It's my favorite show of all time. So today we're going to be talking about The Ruins, both the book and the movie. I wanted to start a new segment or series on this channel, I guess, where I talk about horror books and compare them to their adapted movies. I have already done a couple of these. I've done In the Tall Grass and I'm thinking of ending things, so I will link both of those down below. I think that's the only comparison that I've made. I briefly talked about Woman in the Window, but that's like more of a thriller than a horror. Please leave some requests of books that you would like me to read and then compare to their adapted movies. Besides Stephen King, like I'll take the Stephen King recommendations, but like I know about Stephen King, so obviously there will be many Stephen King books in this series as well, but I think I've been recommended every single Stephen King book to movie adaptation already, so you know, you don't need to waste a comment on that, but I do want to do a thing where it's almost like a book club, because I want you to be able to anticipate what book I'm going to be talking about in a future video, so you can read it and watch the movie so you can fully get the video, because there will be spoilers. Maybe what I'll do is list in the previous video's description box down below, you will find the next book and movie combo that I'll be talking about, so you can come back to the previous video, or we could do it whatever gets the most thumbs up in the comments. Whatever comment is like the most liked down below will be the next one. Maybe I'll base which one I choose on that, so feel free to like some comments down below of books that you'd like to see me talk about. Sometime last year in 2020, actually it was exactly a year, well it was in July of 2020, I decided to become a reader. If I want to be a writer, I gotta be a reader. So I started reading constantly, and now I read every single day, and I'm still not reading as much as I would like, but I'm at like 2 to 3 books a month, which I think is pretty good. Also, just let me know your favorite horror books in general. Obviously, you see some of my TBR over here. You've seen Uzumaki in the background forever. I've still yet to read it, but when I do, I will review it. Anyway, I was thinking we would go through the reviews, like just brief reviews of them individually. So first I'll be talking about the movie, and then I'll get into the book. Both will be spoiler free, and I will have timestamps linked down below if you want to jump around in this video at all. If you want to get straight into the comparison, I will link it. The comparison will have a lot of spoilers in it though, so if you're just curious about each of these individually, no spoilers in those reviews. Now that I've gotten all of that introduction out of the way, let's talk about The Ruins, the movie. So this was released in 2008 and follows a group of friends, 2 couples, and a couple people they meet while vacationing in Mexico as they decide to visit an archaeological dig in the jungle. This takes a deadly turn when they realize there's something carnivorous among the ruins. I would say this movie is very similar to the type and amount of body horror that is in Cabin Fever. It's very comparable. However, I would not compare this movie to Cabin Fever. It's just that's the best reference point for the amount of gore and body horror that you're gonna get from the movie. So if that's generally something that you don't like in horror movies, this is a gore movie. That's the basis of this movie. It's a little bit supernatural as well, but mostly you're watching it for the body horror. But this is one of my favorite gory movies of all time. I think it's highly underrated. We need to talk about this one probably more than Cabin Fever. I enjoyed this one more than Cabin Fever. I just said we're not comparing them, but this one's better, just saying. Now, the writer of the novel is actually the screenwriter for the movie, so while there are major plot differences, which we'll get into in the comparison part of the video, I do think this is actually a really well adapted movie. And the film rights were actually purchased before the book was even published, and the director got the call to make the movie right after he purchased the book. So because the author Scott Smith wrote the screenplay for the movie, it's actually due to his choices that all the plot is pretty much different, which I generally wouldn't like because it's not that accurate to the book, but it made both experiences really enjoyable though, because everything was still a surprise. When you read the book and then watch the movie, you're not going to be able to anticipate everything that happens. Obviously the general gist, the storyline, pretty much the same. You won't have any expectations about what happens to the characters or anything like that. So, and vice versa. If you've seen the movie and you're thinking about reading the book, it is completely different. So it is like a whole new experience. And after reading the book, I can see why they've made some of these changes to kind of simplify it, because the book is kind of long, and it's a very hefty book. Like, there's so much content in it that I can see why they've changed some things and changed a lot about the characters and adapt it into a movie, because this directly adapted, I think, wouldn't have been as successful as a film, but as a book, so good. I do actually recommend watching the movie first and then reading the book. That's the order that I did it, because I've loved The Ruins for years. I think it's a great movie. And then I decided to pick up the book randomly one day and read it. And I really like doing it in that order. And then after I read the book, I watched the movie again. And it was just a really interesting and unique experience to do it in that way, because nothing's really spoiling anything. But given how much I love the movie, I was actually really surprised that I liked the book more. It's just one of those classic cases where the book is better. Like, it just happens so often, especially in horror. I feel that the book is just better executed and better storytelling than the movie. But let's get into the book, shall we? We'll get into my mini review of the novel itself. And again, we're not at spoilers yet, and then I'll get into spoilers at the end. Like I said, this is pretty much the exact same plot of the movie. A bunch of friends vacationing in Mexico decide to go to the ruins. Everything in the beginning of the movie is pretty accurate to the book and how the intro of the book happens. One of my favorite things that Scott Smith does in the book is that there are no real chapters. There's breaks in paragraphs where you get a little bit of a gap, but to me, this just adds to the everlasting dread and tension of the book and makes it nearly impossible to put down. And I think that's such a smart choice to not have any chapters at all, because you really get to feel what the characters are feeling. It's just this never-ending torture. Also, I love whenever the breaks do happen and you have like the little break in paragraph, it switches to a new character. So a lot of times you're seeing the same situation play out multiple times through different perspectives, which just adds to the agony, but in a good way. The pacing of this novel is so good. There were times where I felt like it was a lull in the book, so I would end my session and then the next morning I'd pick it up again and something really extreme happens and I'm like, oh, it's just never ending. Like, it just never stops being interesting. And I went into reading the book expecting what happened in the movie to happen to the characters. So many times I was blindsided by what actually happened that my mouth dropped so many times. I couldn't believe it. And if you think the movie is extreme in the gore, I have the unrated version, so it's a lot of gore. And if you think that's bad, then the book makes that look like a PG-13 little movie. And this just has some of the most effective body horror descriptions that I've ever read, and that are so disgusting. And I read The Troop by Nick Cutter, and that one still tops this one, but this one is second to that because the descriptions are just brutal. And the psychological aspect of this book as well is something that the movie doesn't execute very well at all, which is why I really enjoy the book a little bit more, because it really delves into the pain and suffering and the dehydration and starvation that they're going through, where the movie hardly really touches on those things. It's more about the body horror and the gore than the psychological aspect, but in the book you get both. And there were even times where I was questioning if I could finish it, because like with my movies, I generally don't like extreme horror books either, which why did I read The Troop? I don't know. But I'm really glad I stuck it through. It's a miserable experience, I'm not gonna lie. This one is heavy, it's dark, it's emotional, it's psychological, it's torture, it's gory, it's like true horror. And just the tension just doesn't stop. And it just is so hard to not read within like 1 or 2 days. So obviously I recommend both the movie and the book, and for different reasons, because they are so different and there's so many different plot points that are changed between them. So let's get into those. All of them will be major spoilers. So from here on out, I'm warning you, major spoilers for the plot of both of these and what happens and everything. So if you have not read it or watched the movie yet, I do not recommend finishing the rest of this video, but go read and watch the movie and then come back. Okay, so let's start with the biggest change. Well, I don't know, the first change, I'll say the first change, is that there's really no ruins at all in the book. In the movie, there's obviously the Mayan temple And in the book, there are no ruins. It's just a mound or like a hill with like an old mining shaft. So that's like the first major difference. And I am glad that they added the Mayan temple just for visual effect in the movie, because I found that to be really effective. But they still had the mining shaft because obviously that's a major important piece of the story. But the director had actually suggested that they add the Mayan temple instead of just having it be a hill, and the writer agreed. So the major plot difference that was really weird to me was every single character and death is all switched around. No one dies how they die in the book. In the movie. Like, they're all switched. Pablo, who is called by his real name in the movie, Dimitri, but in the book he's known as Pablo. That's just like a inside joke between him and the other Greeks that they call themselves these names. So they refer to him in the book as Pablo, but Dimitri in the movie dies by being shot. Versus in the book, he's the one that actually falls down the mining shaft and breaks his back. So the tension of the beginning of the story and how they start to build that is completely different from each other as well. So in the book, Matthias stumbles upon his brother's corpse because that's the whole reason why they're going to the ruins, is to hunt down his brother who left with a girl, and that's the same in the movie. And then in the movie, of course, Dimitri is shot, which also known as Pablo in the book, and instead it is Matthias that falls down the mining shaft instead of Pablo. And I did not like this change at all, because I felt like one of the key plot points in the book was that Pablo did not speak any English and no one could communicate with him and tell him what was happening or what they were gonna do, which added so much tension in the book that the movie just did not have. It just added so much more horror to it because they almost didn't know what to do with Pablo, because obviously he was dying. He's rotting away. His back is broken. They can't move him, and so they just kind of leave him because they can't speak to him. He just becomes a low priority, which is so horrific to think about what that would be like from Pablo's perspective. They don't really spend a lot of resources on him because they think that he's dead anyway, so he's just literally left there to die. Of course, we know by the end that that's not really the case. Stacy's the one that goes down the mining shaft and cuts her knee on the broken lantern in the movie, versus Eric in the book. Eric and Stacy are together, they're a couple, and Eric is the one that believes that the vines are growing within him, versus Stacy in the movie. I didn't really mind they changed those characters. I thought it was a little odd that they made that choice. I don't know why it had to be that way. Some of the choices and changes that they made just don't make sense to me. Matthias technically dies. He's the one that falls down the mining shaft in the movie, and he technically dies how Amy dies in the book, and Amy is actually the first one to die in the book, versus in the movie she's the only one to survive. So I'm not sure why they made that choice, because her death in the book is tragic. It's horrific, it's horrifying, and sad. Like, it's just, she died for no reason. And with her death, it's the first introduction of the idea of cannibalism. Granted, there is no cannibalism in the story, but it kind of introduces the idea of how desperate that they are. Eric dies in the movie how Matthias dies in the book, so accidentally stabbed or purposefully stabbed, but with not really the intent to kill them, if that makes sense. Stacy in the movie kills her boyfriend Eric, and in the book Eric stabs Matthias in the chest. I felt like the comparison between Stacy cutting her skin off to get the vine out versus the descriptions of Eric doing this in the book were night and day. It was pretty effective in the movie. I still love those scenes, but the descriptions in the book for this are horrifying. Like, the visuals that you get in your head when they're no, it's just a lot. Like I said before, the movie doesn't really delve into the starvation and dehydration that they're facing. Also, in the book, they choose to drink alcohol at times, which really is a stupid idea, obviously. If you're stranded on, the ruins, you probably don't want to be dehydrating yourself even more. In a deleted scene in the movie, however, at least on the DVD, there is a rain scene, which is similar to what happens in the book, because they finally get rain and are able to collect water. And I almost wish they ended the movie kind of how they ended the book, because I found the end of the book to be satisfying in a way, but like tragic. Like I said, it's a miserable story. The worst case scenario happens, worst case, and the final death in the book haunts me. Like, it is so sad to think about, and this book really stuck with me for a couple days, to the point where I couldn't even start a new book because I felt like I had to pay respect to the deaths in the book that happened, and I couldn't just jump into like the Hunger Games like I wanted to, you know? It's just draining. It's very emotionally draining of a book, but I think it is phenomenal. I don't know if it's one that I'll reread a lot, but I will reread it eventually one day because I just love how Scott Smith is able to get those visuals across. And it's really like the movie times 10. Like, it is so much more graphic and disturbing in the book. I do enjoy the book more just given the horror elements that are in there are just so effective for me. And although it is very, very graphic, it is like the perfect amount of discomfort that it causes. It's nothing too, you know, over the top or gratuitous. In my opinion, it really clearly exemplifies the desperation that people would face if they were stranded like this in a situation where there's like vines eating people. Like, how would you deal with that mentally? Anyway, one of my new favorite books though, highly, highly recommend. Obviously, I always recommend this movie. It's so good. I would love to hear your thoughts if you've both read the book and seen the movie, and which one you prefer, or if you like both, or if you've only seen or read one. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Make sure you leave a request for a future book down below, and check the description for the next book that we're going to be reading and discussing in a future book to movie comparison. So I hope you enjoyed, and I will talk to you soon. Bye. Like, I just hit that.